Well, happy Friday, one and all. Welcome to the Architecture of Change, my new show, where we deconstruct systems and we design solutions. I'm really happy that you're here. I'm Leanne Meyer, and I am a lifestyle architect and strategic advisor. And this show means so much to me because I think it comes not only at an important time societally, but also I want to start to create space for conversation, space to make considerations, space for us to go back and forth and co-create solutions, discuss what's worked, discuss what's not, and really create a space to share. That's the real driver behind this. So as you're dialing in, please feel free to say hello. I can see the comments mostly. But I'm really, really happy to be having this conversation. And today we're really examining a pattern or a series of patterns that span so many different industries, from technology to AI to business, and including politics. And it's really the systematic challenge and the devaluation of women's voices, of our agency, and ultimately how we are allowed, or what kind of space is created for us to be able to move, or rather what space is taken away from us that prevents us making that movement. And I'll start with this because this is something that I really, really think about. We constantly talk about this concept of innovation. What are we innovating? How can we get to the next technological frontier? How can we find ways to improve our lives, make things easier, frictionless, etc., seamless, all of this seamless processing? We think constantly about pushing forward, but as we innovate, we fail to protect. And in a larger context, it's definitely failing to protect all minoritized and marginalized groups. But for this particular example, and for today, I'm talking about women specifically. But those who innovate have a responsibility to also protect. And what's happening at the forefront of every single bit of innovation is that we are seeing the lack of trickle down because of many reasons. But one of the reasons that I talk about very prominently in my book is this: the power pyramid. And this power pyramid makes a lot of people feel very uncomfortable. And I'm just going to caveat this by saying the power pyramid does not mean that you are always that you perpetuate the behavior of what might be racist, sexist, and or both. But what it does highlight is that you are born into a situation because of a system that's being created, that either you're allowed to leverage your position or you are disadvantaged by your position. And in devaluing women, this power pyramid has such an impact as to where we show up, how we show up, how we are protected, and how we even have the opportunities to voice any of that. And today's show is really about, architecture of change is how do we initially identify the construction of the system that constrains? What can we do? Then moving on to, what can we do on an individual and then a collective level? Because the individual can do so much, but it's coming together with other like-minded individuals that allows us to start a collective, which in turn allows us to push forward, create boundaries, create and drive change. And it was even at the point where I started to think about the devaluation of women as a topic and our agency, etc. 3 women came into my mind for very, very different reasons. One was Megan the Stallion after being shot, and the value of her word and being a victim not being recognized and or being perceived as credible. Two was Scarlett Johansson, who basically really decried and sued, I think, in the end, OpenAI for abusing her voice, which is another part around safety, but that can come later. And the third one was Martha Stewart. And the reason, and I'm not sure if anybody has watched the Martha Stewart documentary, but if you haven't, please do. Because, and I'm not going to give any spoilers, but at the crux of that whole situation and her, I'm going to call it downfall, was the need to prove a point as to what a woman should be allowed to do and what a woman should be allowed to say. And part of that was teaching her a lesson. And in many cases, the devaluation of women comes in structured ways. And I read a book recently, and everything that I referenced today, I will put in the comments thereafter so that you can kind of check these resources out. With the kind of rise of online gender-based violence, and UNESCO has published a report, which I will share, which really looks at the fact that women, especially post-COVID or during the pandemic period, but especially then and now, face up to 40% more increased online violence. And online violence isn't just direct abuse, it's misinformation, it's manipulation of images, it's manipulation of your voice, it's men, taking videos, creating what do they call them, avatars of their girlfriends, and then verbally abusing them. These are the kinds of things that have happened. And the UN also goes on to report that while this affects all women, those who are at heightened risk are those who have intersecting social identities of gender and race, gender and sexual orientation, gender and ability. All of those things are there. And this is why, for me, it becomes more important. And I'm going to add this power pyramid till everyone gets fed up of seeing it. This is why it also becomes more important that we look at gender equity and we look at the power pyramid, because the value, I don't think I can do it with I'm not sure if you can see the cursor, because the value of the word of different women is not the same. And it dictates, and I speak about this in my book, it dictates how the needs of each group are prioritized based upon the placement within this pyramid. And nothing reflected this more, I don't believe, than when we look at the Me Too movement. And I have Tarana Burke, that's it. Tarana Burke was the original founder of the Me Too movement, as we know, but it didn't really gain traction until kind of celebrities were pushing this at the forefront. But she did this for minoritized and marginalized women. And this is where you see this time and time again, that we have to become more aware as to the impacts of the power pyramid, because that's really the basis for all of these interactions. And another book that I will, as I said, I'll reference it. It's called Algorithms of Oppression. And I'm just reading my notes because I want to make sure I get the byline right. And it says, How Search Engines Reinforce Racism. And the author is Safia Umoja Noble. And it took me maybe 3 months of trying to finally be able to purchase this book. I feel like it's one of these banned books. But, what she largely talks about is the racism that's perpetuated via Google, via search engines, the coding that's within it. And I think this obviously becomes exacerbated within the space of AI. So it's one of those ones where you say, okay, so what do we do? What's the problem? How do we get around it? And on an individual level, when I think about AI, I think it is a tool. I think it's a tool that's not going to go away. But I think especially as women, it's a tool that we need to be familiar with because A, because of the dangers, but B, in order for us to be able to harness the power of this new technology, to understand where are the dangers for me as an individual. But then on a broader scale, I know that there are so many women working within the AI space to ensure that, I talk about, representation does matter, but a formula that I have is representation plus power equals change. Representation and being at these tables isn't as the only lonely isn't always enough. It's about how do we do more, get more, push more to be able to drive the ship so that it changes in a way that is meaningful. And one of the things that I also found as I was preparing for today was UNESCO, once again, I will share this, has prepared some digital governance in around safeguarding women and safeguarding women who sit at many intersecting social identities, because protection is something that's being left behind. And this theme of protection is absolutely still very much present from technology, but also if we take this into the workplace. I think that now especially is going to be the time where, organizations might think, we can take a step back, or we don't have to do anything, or we don't have to push. But part of organizational transformation right now is protecting those. What do your policies look like? Have you decided to make any changes? Because I think this is one of the things that often falls by the wayside when we're looking at moving forward, when we're looking at growth. Once again, growth and innovation often sacrifice protection. It often sacrifices protection. And I think we are going to need that protection as women, going back to the power pyramid, as women, those of women of color, those as Black women. But recognizing the power pyramid means within the space of organizations, it also means looking at not just saying, what are our leadership statistics? It can't just be about stats. So many of us know that everything gets stuck on stats. The question is, are we providing resources to create and provide support for all these women to the extent that it is required through a lens of equity? Because the pattern is the same over and over again. Somebody innovates, women are forgotten, women of color are forgotten, Black women are forgotten. And it exacerbates levels of trauma that are required to exist in the workplace, to exist on the internet, to exist in general. And I think this is, for me, why the conversation around gender equity and the value of a woman's word becomes so important. Because I think I saw it somewhere online, right, where it said, if I've said it wrong, I apologize, but it's something along those lines of, if a woman tells you something, believe her. Believe her. Because time and time again, we are continuously in the situation of having to prove ourselves. We're in the situation of having to justify why we have certain beliefs. We have to justify why certain actions are wrong, even when you may be a victim in a situation. And part of architecting change is being able to reframe the challenge. But it's also, as an individual, if you're not a woman, if you're not a woman of color, if you're not a Black woman, is asking yourself, where is it that I can possibly add value? And I'm using privilege in the context of parts of your identity that you do not have to think about when you step into rooms, or fear for your safety due to those identities. How can I use that to amplify the voice of somebody else? How can I? Because I think the time is really genuinely now to start doing the legwork. We can't keep always asking questions. We have to try. And like they say in business, you have to fail fast. There's no avoiding failure. It's the speed with which you fail and the speed with which you rebound that allows you to succeed. Fail fast. We're 50% of the population. Yet we are excluded. This is just a Leanne figure. This is not a figure that is anywhere, but we are excluded almost 90% of the time. So what does so that tells us, like, even from a perspective of possibilities, this also doesn't make any sense. So when I think about it, there's 3 or 4 things that continue to happen, and I'm writing them down. I'm sketching them out as I'm talking. One is the maintenance of power. The power pyramid still exists in its most absolute forms today. And we can see that, and it is evidenced in politics. It is evidenced in the corporate space. It's evidenced in the way money is invested. It's evidenced in all these places. But that doesn't mean that there aren't places to maneuver. And I think this is where it becomes important to understand the tools at our disposal, like the impacts of technology, like, it might be more around legislation, like understanding the corporate construction, being a part of a cultural shift, thinking about becoming parts of collectives that aren't just to commiserate, although there should be space for that, but that also come together to strategize and, most importantly, take action. Because the pattern of devaluing the agency of women is one that is being pushed further and further forward. And in some cases, as we know, is right there, is happening right now. And unfortunately, it has to be navigated. But that doesn't mean it's the end of the story, is what I'm trying to say. There is so much strength in community, and I have learned that without doubt this year. There is so much strength in conversations. And I'm not saying everybody now has to go out and decide to, protect everybody else like that, but there's an element of being able to share wisdom around, collective wisdom. How do I navigate those tools? What should I be thinking about? And as I said, I don't have all the answers, and I'm hoping that with time and frequency and all those other things, that we develop more conversation around this. But it might be developing communities together to have these kinds of conversations, not even necessarily online. But I really want to start the momentum of putting it out there. Whether you agree or disagree with what I'm saying, that's still a great feeling. Having an opinion, thinking like it's not applicable. These are really, really important parts of change. It's not ever going to be it's never going to be fully smooth, right? It's never going to be without friction. It's never going to be without difficulty. But this is where it should start. The value of my voice should be no less than any man's, but the value of my voice should also be no less than any other woman's. And I stand by that. And in embracing innovation, and this is why I love resources and research, is because they create an awareness of what is out there, what is happening, but also gives us all the tools to be able to protect, exist, and succeed in these spaces. Because I find it really interesting that, as I said, this thread with these three women, Megan Thee Stallion, Scarlett Johansson, and Martha Stewart, on the face of it, they have nothing in common. But when you look at the systematic devaluation and also thinking about the pattern, it's always an attack on a woman's credibility, an attack on her credibility that's then almost juxtaposed against the stereotype of what femininity should be. The not just respectability politics, but the ultra woman, as it were, the ideal woman, as it were, and they're always pitted against them. And when women don't fit that box, or they challenge the system as is, we come up against this barrier time after time after time. And I think that's the challenge, is that the pattern is there. And this is not to say that we have to keep doing everything differently, or we have to change who we are, because trying to fit into those molds would break most of us anyway. But it's more about, how do I realize what these barriers are? And sometimes the instinct is to disavow. For example, I'll just take AI. I don't know where this was, and I'm going to find this article, but it was just talking about like a lot of women actively not engaging with AI because there's a fear around it, because of the online abuse, because of its misuse. And when I think about this, and someone also said this, it's like, if we interact with these things, then it's not that they can't live up to our worst fears, but we have a better understanding of the potential dangers that we face, and whether it's on an individual level. For every woman that I know, we probably all talk to, I don't know, let's just say 10 as an example. You take that 10 and you times it by 10, it's the effect. It's the effect of recommendation. I call it, evangelists. It's the effect of the strength of your network. And you say something's great and someone goes, great. You say something's terrible, they go, okay, I probably won't use it. Recommendation. These kinds of conversations need to keep happening, whether it's in the workplace, whether it's online, whether it's engaging with new technology. Because the truth is, as I said, representation plus power makes change. And sometimes the power comes from numbers. Sometimes the power comes from numbers. And I don't know exactly what my call to action is, but I think my call to action is really I do. I'm taking it back. One is to engage with innovation, to understand it more. And when I say like understand it more, I'm not necessarily saying going out to learn how to code. If you want to, you can. But there are quite a few online courses that are free that you can that we can take. I've been looking into them myself. Happy to share as well as a resource below. Two is finding it's probably already there. So I'm going to change that word to nurturing those friendships, relationships, connections, where the value of your word is valued as any other. Not least those who are also willing to amplify your voice and the voices of others. And the third one has just slipped my mind, which is really annoying. It's gone. It's gone. No, it's gone. Hopefully it'll come back. But those are the two. There was a third one. Because this is where looking at the foundations of something that is completely wrong, that benefits a very, very small minority, needs to change. It needs to change. So this is my way of saying, when we remember that we're not in it alone, it makes things a lot easier to deal with. It makes things a lot easier. There's nothing that's too overwhelming. And it's this part around architecting change means that we require solutions that transform systems. And that if we design it today, we can make it a reality tomorrow. And that is, for me, the most important part of coming together and having conversation, sharing, collective wisdom, is that if we start to design blueprints for change, we can find ways to make them a reality. So I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in to the first show of Architecture of Change. I am so happy for all of you who dialed in. If you do have any questions, I will wait a couple of seconds, a couple of minutes for you to drop them in your comments box. If you have any comments, if you have any suggestions, how you feel about kind of the devaluation of women's voices and agency, or how do you feel about the power pyramid, would absolutely love your thoughts. But if you're too shy, I also understand, because sometimes I just enjoy talking to my screen. So I'm going to wait a couple of seconds, and if nothing happens, then I will say goodbye. But I will play some music. I think it should play. Let me see if it happens. Can you hear the music? Thank you. I'm really sorry. I cannot see who it is. I said thank you so much. But when I go onto my LinkedIn page, I will look to see. So I will do that. Oh no, I can see. But if you want to share anything, I am here. But thank you for taking the time to join. I really appreciate it. I've forgotten how much I enjoy sharing. What's a very first step one can start creating the blueprint? If you're talking from an individual perspective, and I'll say I would look at this If we're talking from kind of a technological side, I would say, and as I said, I'll share that in the comments as well. I would say kind of reading books around, yes, there's the AI side of things, but I'm going to say not for scaremongering purposes, but an informed step, an informed this book by like Oppressions of Algorithm. It's a really informed take, somebody who worked in tech to give us deep insights on what is happening and how it can, not always will, but can be to our detriment. That's one thing I would do. The other thing I would do is, now this one I would say approach with caution, which is people can seem like-minded at the beginning, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they always are. And I say this with love and respect. I have joined sometimes like groups with women and it just hasn't worked out, and definitely hasn't been for me. So it's kind of like, take that first step in maybe trying to find like-minded women who are focused on, it might be empowerment, it might be injustice, etc. And start to kind of get to know them, but don't necessarily put all your eggs in one basket and necessarily believe in that because you're all there, you have the same agenda. Yeah, I love that question. How would you suggest that Black women get their voices heard and valued in places of power? That is such an awesome question as well. Because that is one of the hardest things. Well, we know that is one of the hardest things to navigate, because to get there, it's like, I'm not even going to speak to qualifications because that doesn't matter. It's like excellence plus social capital plus a sponsor plus doing all of the things to sacrifice yourself. That the four is, it's so incredibly hard that I would almost I would even say that in a lot of cases this is the real true value of sponsorship. And when I say the real true value of sponsorship, it's because real sponsors, not only do they hit the door, they kick the door off for you, but as a Black woman, your sponsor also needs to know how to speak up for you when in the face of racism and misogyny. They need to know how to do that, because we can do a lot of this by ourselves. But if the audience belongs to the top of the power pyramid and they hold particular views around us, or about us, I should say, it's where the sponsor can be the most important part and game changer in all this. Because the fact of the matter is that qualifications, we don't need to talk about. Our ability to deliver, we don't need to talk about. Our ability to be strategic, we don't need to talk about. So usually it's linchpinned on this part around social capital and a sponsor, because everything else that would work usually for non-Black women doesn't apply in our case. And I think it's not always the case for every. So, I'm sure people say, well, that wasn't like the case for me. And I'm not saying for all, but we know that a lot of the times the people speaking on your behalf in all the rooms have to always be speaking on your behalf in a way that demonstrates that you are not only there because someone wants a Black woman in the room, but you're there because you should be there. And that can sometimes be a piece that's missing. That was a rather long answer, but I really like both of those questions. I genuinely really like both of those questions. So I'm going to say thank you so much for your time on this Friday morning, afternoon, very, very early morning. And I look forward to seeing you same time, same place next week, Friday, so that together we can architect the change. Have a great Friday. Bye-bye.